Okay, now we are due for another Mycroft status update. So I've made quite a few changes since the last one, and it is definitely worthy of an update in my opinion. Got some pretty exciting stuff in my opinion, so why don't we just get into it? So one of the first major changes I've made with it is I now have the ability to control the volume. So I don't have full control right now. I have as much control as I need. I typically want to either increase or decrease it by a certain amount. Okay, so let's try it out. So obviously if I'm listening to a song or watching a video or doing something with audio in general, sometimes I might want to increase or decrease the volume, especially across the room. I can just shout to do that. Because sometimes I'll be listening to a song and then there's a point where it's not properly balanced and suddenly I'm getting ear raped, which is not good. So I might want to decrease the volume, and doing a voice command may be quicker than hitting the button on this controller to decrease the volume, which yes, that is really how I do it. So you can see the volume going down right there. But yeah, so why don't we give it a try? Hey Mycroft, play Cyber Dice. So we'll try with this real quick. So let's say that's not quite loud enough for me yet. So then I could go, hey Mycroft, increase the volume. You can tell the volume went up a little bit. Yeah, you can imagine, it's pretty self-explanatory. I think that's pretty much all I can do with that right now. So another thing that's definitely worth noting is I can also use that same skill to put the computer to sleep because the actual underlying logic is virtually the same. I'll show how I do it in a bit, but I can also put the computer to sleep, and what's really cool about that is it actually not only puts the computer to sleep, but it automatically shuts off the Steam controller and even shuts off my TV with HDMI CEC. So I can do that all with the voice command, which is pretty incredible. So then I can go, hey Mycroft, lay down. That's a little bit of a joke, but yeah. Steam controller just shut off, and yeah, I believe the computer really went to sleep. Yep, it is in fact on standby right now. The light's blinking and everything. So then if I'm on the couch, then I just grab this, turn it on, and that wakes up the computer. Yeah, I literally woke it up with this device right here. Very handy to have for on the couch. Beats the keyboard and mouse experience in a lot of situations. Something that I've also done is add the ability to run a bunch of commands and then go to sleep using an AND compound word. So what I mean by that is sometimes I might be watching a video which is opened by an Explorer window. Sometimes I want to be able to close that Explorer window and then go to sleep immediately after. They're in completely separate skills, so I can't really do my AND mechanism as a result, but I added a manual AND mechanism so that I can basically go to sleep after I've done some command. So yeah, let's say I want to close this and then immediately shut off the computer. Then I can go, hey Mycroft, eliminate program and go to sleep. And that does exactly what you'd think. So I've added that ability to the sleep skill, I believe, and that normally wouldn't be possible. So that's pretty cool. Something I've also done is adding a bunch of quantifiers to basically repeat a command a certain amount of time. So like, for example, if I want to fast forward multiple times, or I want to close multiple tabs, or I want to, there's quite a few things I want to do multiple times. And a lot of times if I want to like skip an intro to a show, then I can basically do a command, but I can have it do it X amount of times now. So like for example, let's say I want to essentially just play this and then basically hit the right arrow 7 times. Then I can go, hey Mycroft, play a video and fast forward 7 times. Pretty neat. I like that. It comes in handy a lot of times. So, yeah, let me just end it now. Hey Mycroft, end program. So yeah, it's pretty cool to be able to give a quantifier for certain commands, because I would do it once and then I found myself manually doing it because I needed to do something more than once. And you can imagine that it works with tabs as well. So like, let's say I wanted to close these 3 tabs to the left. Then I can go, hey Mycroft, close previous tab 3 times. That comes in really handy quite a few times, especially if I'm searching for a video across multiple tabs during my search process. So something I can also do is repeat the last command. So let's say that so what often happens for me is sometimes when I start up the computer, I might search Google or YouTube for something, and then the connection did not reestablish in time, so my command never actually made it through. And then I often find it handy to just repeat it once the connection was established, so I don't have to issue it again. Hey Mycroft, search Google Mycroft voice assistant. So let's pretend that I did that, but the connection between the Raspberry Pi and my computer wasn't quite established yet. Well, in that case, then I can just say, hey Mycroft, repeat that. And then it'll repeat the last command. I don't know why that didn't work just now. Let me try again. Hey Mycroft, repeat that last command. It might be doing something a little weird right now. Every once in a while, it'll behave weird in that the light that I have for when I'm issuing a command, that normally comes on when it's listening, right? Then I can tell it's listening. But sometimes it comes on suspiciously quickly. Like, I could literally be like, hey Mycroft, repeat that. So it'll come on instantly. And then when it does that, the command doesn't end up executing. Anytime the light comes on faster than normal, there is something wrong. I'm not sure why the repeater didn't work just now. Why don't we try it with end program. Hey Mycroft, end program. And then let's say I wanted to do that again. Then I can go, hey Mycroft, repeat that. I don't know why that's not working. It was working earlier today. It would repeat that, as you can imagine. It does normally work, just take my word for it. That's embarrassing that it's not right now, but it does most of the time. Most of the time I end up using this on the couch, and for demonstration purposes, I moved this to a whole different computer and remapped everything to this computer, which is not normally hooked up to the couch. And something with that is probably the reason why it's not working right now. Normally it does. And what's also cool is I could use the repeater with a quantifier. So let's say I want to repeat something 5 times. Hey Mycroft, repeat that 3 times. Okay, so I was just doing a little bit of troubleshooting and I discovered something really interesting. So if I say repeat that, which is a valid command, it interferes with a skill that I'm about to show in a little bit. But if I say repeat that last command, then it behaves correctly. I'm gonna have to modify some of my locales to fix that, but I think I can demonstrate it after all. Hey Mycroft, search Google Mycroft voice assistant. And then let's say I wanted to, let's pretend that that didn't work because the connection wasn't quite established yet. Then I can go, hey Mycroft, repeat that last command. Then it does it again. As you can imagine, there is a quantifier as well. Hey Mycroft, repeat that last command 10 times. Come on. It stopped listening too early. It does that every once in a while too. Hey Mycroft, repeat that command 9 times. There we go. And that works as you'd expect. So another cool thing I've done since last time is I changed how the typing mechanism works in quite a few ways. So first of all, you probably remember from last time, every time I type something, it inserts a new line at the end. And I could not do anything about that. But I completely changed the method. Basically, I was doing it in a command line or command prompt way. Now I'm doing it in a PowerShell way, and it works a lot better. So let's try something down here, for example. Hey Mycroft, type how are you today? So unlike last time, it doesn't insert a new line at the end, which is pretty nice. Because it always used to do, of course that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to insert a new line right there. I'm going to do this demo in Notepad real quick. Here's a good example of using that repeater. Hey Mycroft, repeat that last command. And then so if I type something real long and I need to do that multiple times, since I don't have a quantifier for typing, I could just type once and then use the skill repeater with a quantifier. That works pretty well. So yeah, normally I used to type like this. I used to have to always go like this and then backspace to get rid of that line below it. That was a pain, but now I don't have to do that anymore. Also, you'll probably notice that it uppercased the first letter. So I do have the ability to do that, and then I can also type in stuff like a comma, or I think it does Mycroft correctly now because it normally recognizes it as Minecraft. But now if I go, hey Mycroft, type Mycroft, no, it still does it wrong. We can fix that in a bit when I show how this works, but I can type special characters like commas or question mark. Hey Mycroft, type comma, I'm doing good, period. Hey Mycroft, type question mark, I'm doing good, period. So that should do the characters, which is not for some reason. Hey Mycroft, type you question mark. Yeah, so there it does an actual question mark now. I can do a comma, a period. I mean, I can do anything I want because behind the scenes it's basically doing replace statements. So the possibilities are basically limitless with that. Something else I've done that's pretty exciting as well is the ability to control my Philips Hue lights. So there is some skills that already exist, but I could not get them working on my system. So I ended up using a Python library and making my own Philips Hue library. I have a couple videos going over that. I just made one not too long ago too. So I can do a fair amount of stuff with it now. So I'll do a quick little demo here. So here's my Philips Hue lights. So I can be like, hey Mycroft, half brightness. And then the brightness did in fact dim by half. So that made me a little bit dimmer. Hey Mycroft, full brightness. And then you'll see me get a little bit brighter on the side, which is pretty cool. I can turn the lights on and off. I probably don't have to demonstrate that. And I can also set the color temperature to specific color temperatures, like warm, for example. So let me do that real quick. Hey Mycroft, set the color temp to warm. Now the color temperature is a little bit warmer than normal. I'm gonna set it back because sometimes a warm color temperature doesn't work the best with the green screen. That's not too bad right now, but it does cause problems sometimes. Hey Mycroft, set color temp cold. Then that'll set it to the 6500K, which is what I like to have most of the time. I can also do stuff like, I think I have an overlay actually. Yeah. Okay, I can also do stuff like setting it to some very specific temperature. Hey Mycroft, set the color temperature 3500K. I could also word it as 3500. Not sure if that's the exact right number, but it does stuff like that. I can also set the brightness to a specific percent. Hey Mycroft, set the brightness 40%. And it dimmed the lights a fair bit. And what's also cool is I can compound multiple commands together and basically, yeah, just like the AND mechanism with some of my other skills, I can do that here too. Hey Mycroft, set the brightness 100% and the color temperature to cold. And there's a few different ways I can word that. So that just did both of those commands at once. It also works with colors too, since I have Philips Hue that work with colors. Hey Mycroft, set the color to blue. So that works as well. So I could do the AND with multiple colors if I wanted, of course, too. So like, hey Mycroft, set the color to red and color purple. I think that should do both of them. It happens so quickly. That's purple in case you can't tell. Kind of hard to tell from that angle. But that is a purple color, just so you know. There's dead ladybugs in there, so my apologies about that. I should have gotten that out beforehand. It's impossible to take that apart though, it's a pain. But anyway, so now let's say I want to set it back to normal. Hey Mycroft, set color temp cold and brightness 100%. There we go. Now that worked, and the green screen keying is a lot better too, as you can imagine. So yeah, it's pretty cool. That pretty much sums up most of what I can do right now. I'm gonna make quite a few tweaks to it in the future. I'm hoping to someday maybe set some schedules with it. I could even have it fade to a certain color or brightness or pretty much anything over time. I can do pretty much anything over time because I'm doing this in Python and all that stuff is possible. I'm thinking it'd be cool to do something like set a one-time schedule for 6 a.m. to fade on red for 5 minutes. So what that command would do is it sets an alarm for 6. It fades on the color red from 0 to 100% over the course of 5 minutes. Doing a command like that would be pretty cool. I would also like to be able to control individual bulbs. Maybe I want to set one light to one color, another light to a whole different color, and that sort of thing. But for now, this is pretty much all I could ever ask for. So I could add other things like a strobe or whatever. And I'd probably be able to add presets if I wanted to. So like for example, my typical Philips Hue has the ability to do like this police color. So it kind of looks like there's crime going on right now. Not sure if you can tell, but doesn't it look like there's crime happening in this room? Might be kind of hard to tell with that green screen view, but it'd be nice to be able to do a voice command with something like that in the future. So that's something I could program later as well. I've also, related to lights, obviously, you know, I have the breadboard with status LEDs on it. I've improved the status LEDs quite a bit too. So first of all, the red light now works properly. Well, I mean, as properly as I'd like it to right now, but I'll explain what I mean by that. So right now, if I issue a command, you can imagine that, so I can be like, hey Mycroft, set the brightness 50, and then the yellow light actually comes on when it's executing a command. So I can tell if it's executing a command too. So that's also pretty nice. So the red light never came on, as you can see there. But right now I'm using this Ethernet, and I rely on that Ethernet for anything to work at all. So if I should suddenly unplug the Ethernet, or it slips out. Now if I try to do that, hey Mycroft, set the brightness to 50%. Now the red light comes on because it can't execute the command. So most of the time, the reason why I wouldn't be able to is because I typically use a peer-to-peer connection nowadays, and sometimes, since I don't have a latch on my Ethernet cable, the cord can slip out. I really should replace the cable, but if the cord slips out, it can sometimes take a while to figure out that that's what the problem was. So the red LED now will tell me right away if it's unplugged or not. So if I were to plug it back in, it should take about 20 to 30 seconds for it to connect, and then the red LED won't come on anymore as long as it works. So what I meant by it not being perfect at the moment is it basically checks if my Ethernet's even plugged in to begin with. I'll show how it actually works in a bit, but it checks if there's anything plugged into the Ethernet port, and if there's not, then the red light comes on. I would like to make it so that it actually detects proper errors in the future. For now, that Ethernet thing is more than good enough for me. So as you saw, now the yellow light works too. So basically anytime a command is being executed by the voice assistant, the yellow light will be on. And that's actually provided some really interesting insights, because I've had some times where I issue a command and it takes like 20 seconds before anything happens. So I was thinking it was because there was a delay in listening to me, but what I actually discovered is the green light went on and off exactly when I would have expected it to. But then all of a sudden, about 20 seconds later, the yellow light finally comes on for the first time. Usually it's almost instant, but sometimes it doesn't come on until like 10 or 20 seconds later. And then sure enough, the command did not execute until it came on. So sometimes that's basically giving me insight into the fact that sometimes commands don't execute instantly on the Raspberry Pi, as indicated by the yellow light. So previously I was making it so that it would shut off as soon as the command was finished executing, but I can't reliably make it shut off at the end of every single command. Some commands it'll stay on forever just because of the nature of how the command works. Basically I'm doing it based on a message from the messenger service, and there's two different messages that I can basically use to turn the yellow LED off. So I've decided, so something else that happens with the voice assistant is if I execute two commands like too close to each other, the second one won't actually register even if it was listening. It's kind of annoying not knowing exactly when I can issue my next command if I'm doing a whole bunch of them next to each other. So I made it so that the yellow LED shuts off as soon as it's safe to execute another command. That's how I know it's safe to do my next command. Once the yellow LED shuts off, it stays on until that time is up. Then I can finally issue another command. I think it's a glitch with the voice assistant, but for now, that's useful. It's technically fixed now. Watch the next update where I'll likely show how I ended up getting the computer trigger phrase figured out. Yes, I figured it out now. In the meantime, here's a demo of it. Computer, lay down. Because yeah, for some commands, if I have it shut off as soon as a command is done, there's some commands where it doesn't shut off at all. and the light could literally be on until I execute my next command, which could be hours away potentially. And that's kind of annoying to have it on when it's not supposed to be, so I don't do that. I just have it shut off when it's safe to execute the next command, based on something that comes through the messenger service, which I'll go over in a bit. I now have the ability to back up all my scripts and stuff too, automated using a command as well. I'll show you how that works, but first we gotta close all these programs. So I can go, hey Mycroft, end program 3 times. And then I think that's, oh, should have known it would do that. Hey Mycroft, eliminate program twice. Okay, so I have this folder that basically has all my skills backed up, as well as essentially any of my other files, like my breadboard script and all my other files associated with the voice assistant. Right now, this backup is not up to date. It's actually quite behind because it doesn't have the latest Philips Hue skills. I've made a few other tweaks as well that aren't up to date either. So to back up my voice assistant now, I used to manually use SCP to transfer it over, and that was really annoying. So I made a script that does that for me, and thus a skill. So the first thing I do is I delete the old files because there's permission issues, because the username between the Pi and my main computer are different. So due to those permissions, I just can't overwrite files. It's easier to just delete the files than to try to figure out how to overwrite permissions and stuff. So I delete that, and then I go, hey Mycroft, backup voice assistant, and then all the files should automatically propagate. So now all my stuff is getting backed up, and then I can have my cloud backup automatically pick up those files too. Then I'm pretty much set. I got 2 local copies and 1 cloud copy. Then all that work I've done on this is pretty saved at this point. This is pretty much everything I would ever need to back up. So something else that you actually missed just now is the fact that I have the yellow LED blink a couple times because I don't get any obvious feedback. So I have the yellow LED blink a certain amount of times to tell me that it's using one of my codes. So let me do that again. Hey Mycroft, backup voice assistant. I could have also used the repeater. So as you saw there, the yellow LED blinked 3 times. That means it's backing up the voice assistant. So when I do my cloud backup, sometimes I can't tell if the cloud backup turned on or off. So I have a certain amount of blinking to indicate that too. And the number means something specific to me. So yeah, I can do blinking codes, which is kind of helpful. Another massive improvement that I've made to it is I've completely automated the startup process finally too. Well, kind of. I manually started up on the Raspberry Pi, but as you know, on my Windows machine, I have to start WSL as well as the SSH service, and then that allows it to connect and everything. So I've automated that process so I don't have to do anything on my computer. Every time I started it up, I used to have to come into WSL and then manually start the SSH service every single time. But now I don't have to do that because I've automated the process. I'd like to show how I did that. So the first thing I do is I basically run a PowerShell command to do that. So to start up WSL at startup, I have an AutoHotkey script that runs at startup and does several different things. So you can see I got quite a few lines in the file. But one of the things I do is I run this command right here. And actually that doesn't use PowerShell. I just run WSL as root. and then I run this specific file, which will always run at startup in the WSL environment. So there's a file in etc called init.wsl. So if I were to take a look at that, etc init.wsl, then I denote that it's an sh script, and then I specify to start SSH. And that actually does make it run at startup. It not only starts up WSL, but runs the SSH command at startup. That's a pretty efficient way to do it. There's quite a lot of different ways it can be done. I've tried cron tabs and things like that, but that never works for me. I could be doing something wrong, but this method works pretty well, and it's simpler than pretty much everything I've seen. So if you weren't using AutoHotkey, then you could create a batch script or a PowerShell script to run this at startup, or every time you log on to the computer. And that's it. That's all I do to start up WSL. I use a task scheduler to create the startup. Actually, for this script, I use shell startup, and my AutoHotkey script is in there. I have a shortcut because it's actually stored elsewhere, and I want it to always update if I make a change to the script. The shortcut will reference that. So yeah, that's how I start up WSL at startup. Another problem I often run into is, so I like to use a peer-to-peer connection between my Raspberry Pi and the Intel NUC right here. I like to use a WSL, or I like to use a peer-to-peer connection between these systems. So what I tend to do is, unfortunately, the firewall doesn't actually work unless I set the Ethernet to private. So you know that network interfaces can be either public, private, or I forget what the other one is, somewhere in between. But if it's public, no matter how much you mess with the firewall settings, the connection just won't be made. But if I change the network type to private, then it does work perfectly fine. So this will basically set my Ethernet adapter to private, and this script runs as startup. It runs as administrator, so this has admin privileges, and basically you just run this in PowerShell. But through AutoHotkey, I launch PowerShell and run the command in that fashion. And then the window doesn't pop up at startup either, which is kind of nice. So yeah, this is how I set the Ethernet adapter to private at startup. And then I don't have to do that manually either. I think to run WSL at startup, I also run this command in PowerShell if I'm not mistaken. So it's possible that I run these commands entirely separately. But on my main system, I think I was able to get away without that dbus command if I'm not mistaken. But that's how I run it at startup essentially. And then also fix that Ethernet problem that I have with firewall. I have to run it every time I start up the system because it defaults to private or public. I would also like to share an interesting lesson of something that I ran into. So there was a point when I was trying to issue some commands. I was just trying to issue like maybe one command, but it would end up doing two completely unrelated things. And some of my commands just were not working and I couldn't figure out why. So basically it had to do with a mistake that I made in my AND mechanism. But I want to kind of go over the lessons learned from this. I like how this says backing up myself when I ask it to do that. So I basically recreated a script. So yeah, I'm trying to get to the bottom of why my utterances are glitching out. So I basically replicated my skill in a normal Python script because I'm never going to get to the bottom of it if I'm constantly debugging in the messenger service with Mycroft, because it just gets, I have to restart the skill every minute. Every time I make a change, I have to wait a whole minute for it to take effect. That's a pain, so I've replicated it in a script. So here's basically an utterance that glitched out. So I can manually put a pseudo utterance right there, then see what ends up happening. So if I open Nook folder twice, obviously that's spelled wrong, but that's how the voice assistant recognizes it, so that's how it is behind the scenes. It's because it references it until Nook and UC. But anyway, let's run this. So test utterance glitches. So I would basically expect Nook folder to run twice. But when I actually run it, I get the Nook folder once, and then all of a sudden Ducto ends up running. I never said anything related to Ducto at all. So why would this be happening? So yeah, I should have, for the output, I should have ended up getting this both the first and second time. So I've written code that kind of helped me debug what ends up happening when I give it an utterance. So just to give you an example of where it's useful, let's do an utterance that works normally. So I say open YouTube, for example. I would expect it to reference YouTube. This is my YouTube command right there. That does work perfectly fine, as you would expect. But why is it that when I do the Nook folder twice, it ends up doing it once and then Ducto instead? And then if I try something else like watch later, for example, this is what happens. It ends up opening, this is not even watch later, by the way, and that's nothing to do with watch later either. Why does watch later, which doesn't even have an and in there, give me two things instead of one? And then where it's also bizarre is if I do something like open my test channel, that's a command that I have that opens a channel that has this video in it. Why do I get my music folder and then Seinfeld? I literally just put one command and it ended up doing two that aren't even related. What is going on here? This is bothering me. I used to have commands that worked perfectly fine. Now it's glitching out in the most random places. Well, long story short, this is what's at fault right here. So as you know, I added basically replace statements so I can say words that sound like and. Well, I did not consider the fact that certain commands may actually contain this, and it does. So like for example, watch later has at in the word watch. The AT that's right there, that literally gets replaced with and then you can see how it would compound commands together. And then because there's certain letters missing, that's why it ends up matching with the fuzzy search results that aren't even relevant. Because yeah, I have a fuzzy search mechanism in here as indicated by this and that. But yeah, what the heck is going on? Yeah, it basically has to do with these replace statements. I didn't consider the fact that words could have this right in the middle of it. So that's a very important lesson. You have to be careful how you design things because you could break stuff in ways that you never meant to. So what is the solution to this? Well, the word and is always going to have a space in it, so therefore all the commands should have a space like this. That's basically what it needs to do, and that's what ends up fixing it. And then I think I have to do a space right here too. And I also have to make sure that it follows certain rules, like a before and after. No, I don't think that's relevant to this actually, but I have this other file that basically has how it should be. So this is what it should be right there. What happens with open my test channel? I think this is what ended up happening. But yeah, that's because of the improper and statements. So let's come back to this file. So let's do like open my test channel. Well, watch later was the one that was the most annoying. So I do open watch later. Let's run that script now. Now it does exactly what you'd expect. So hopefully I convey the main lesson learned here. You really do have to be careful with how you design stuff like this, because something that used to work could end up breaking. So the main lessons I wanted to teach here is careful with how you design stuff. If you have a major problem, maybe create a normal Python script rather than using your skill, because that will make debugging go a lot faster and easier. So then once I figured it out, then I just fixed this and then added that to my skill, and that fixed it as you would expect. I probably ran into some mistakes as I was adapting it, but they're like basically human errors that I figured out and eventually fixed. And then I guess the other lesson learned is if there's like a major change, or if something used to work and it's no longer working, consider changes that you've made and how that could affect certain things. You can see how it would have been difficult to figure out that this is what was happening. But yeah, if something used to work but now isn't, consider that changes you're making could be affecting that over time. This is something that literally slowly took place over time, and then it progressively got worse to the point where I'm like, okay, this has to get fixed now. This is getting serious. I'm not sure if Mycroft is becoming glitchy or if it's something that I'm doing. It was something I was doing, but yeah, I was starting to get really concerned. Like, is it going to get to a point where it's no longer usable? Well, long story short, that's all it was, and I haven't had any issues since then. So related to that, I've also made another pretty major change. So you probably remember that my files used to be formatted like this, where there's like a whole bunch of backslashes, and that's really inefficient. It's a pain to create commands in this fashion. I want to be able to just use a single backslash and then also not have to worry about parentheses and things like that too, or spaces, because I also have to escape any spaces that there are. That's a real pain, so I decided that I'd use a bunch of replace statements to make it so that I could just use a single backslash and stuff. So yeah, now if we look at my command file, now you can see that I can do a single backslash and it works. So I mentioned in the past I had to mess with a bunch of Python quotations. I had to do stuff with like a single quote, triple quote, single double quote, triple double quotes. I might have that mixed up, but the point is the quotations gets real messy. And I had AI try to help me for like 5 hours. Didn't give me a good answer. Then I decided, why couldn't I have it behind the scenes, interpret it the same way, but then use replace statements so that I can format it how I want, and then it gets replaced into what it's supposed to be. So I've done exactly that. I wanted to also mention that as I created the replace statements, I created a Python script for that too. So basically, let's say that essentially what I did is I have my current file with all the backslashes and escape characters, and then I reformatted it into the format that I want. So if I look in this file, for example, that's the old format, and then this file is exactly the same thing, but with the new format that I want. Right, this is basically the same file but with the new format. So I decided a good way to get the replace statement set up is doing basically a comparison and making sure that both of those files that I just showed get interpreted behind the scenes exactly the same. The replace statement will change a bunch of this into the format that I want behind the scenes, and we just take this raw, apply a bunch of replace statements to this, and if it worked correctly, it should get interpreted exactly the same way. Even though these files are different, after applying the replace statements, I should be able to compare them, and they should be exactly the same, with no differences whatsoever. So I figured creating the replace statements is going to be kind of hard, so I decided to create a Python script that I'm sort of treating like a unit test. Because obviously I'm making a major change, we should still be able to pass all the unit tests. And I think there's a lot of value in doing that. I ran into a whole bunch of problems and the unit tests were so handy in figuring them out. So yeah, right now I basically have a Python script which contains all my replace statements and stuff like that. And then my unit test. So obviously a test is basically the before and after for each and every single line. So there's 200 lines in the file, then as far as I'm concerned, that's 200 separate tests. And obviously if something gets interpreted wrong behind the scenes, then we failed the tests. And if we make it this far, nothing has failed, so therefore we pass all the tests. So yeah, I created a script just to make it easy to unit test my files. So I purposely made it so some things are incorrect, which will kind of illustrate some of the issues I ran into and then how I solved it. So if I were to run that file, you'll see that, okay, this is index 0. This is a line that's failing. The unit tests have failed. Oh, interesting. So this is pretty much what I would expect, except we're missing a character right here. So we have an interesting situation where we want to escape all spaces except for a space that separates like a program in the command prompt and its argument. So I'm running command prompt, and I'm running this within command prompt, and then what folder do I want to open? Running Explorer, the C drive. So this is an argument for explorer.exe, but we're missing an E because of the replace statement and how that's structured. So basically, if an error like that happens, that means I have an error somewhere in this function right here. So basically, I'm not escaping any spaces, as you can see right there. So any space should be replaced with an escaped space. That's essentially what I'm doing behind the scenes. So let's uncomment that line. Basically, that's me manually adding the functionality. Now let's try it. Okay, so now it's working correctly. However, at 21, we're now running into a whole different issue. The tests have still failed, and this tells me where it failed. So if I look at this, that is being applied correctly right there. However, there's an escape space in this area, and that's not what I want. So how do I escape all spaces except for the argument for whatever program I'm running in command prompt? So youtube.com is an argument to Brave, which I'm running in the command prompt, right? Well, how do I escape all spaces except this one? So one of my thought processes was I would put 2 spaces here, and then behind the scenes that gets converted into 1. But that has a whole bunch of problems. It solves that problem, but it creates new problems, so that's not a good solution. So what I actually want is what I'm essentially doing is looking for the last colon. So if you were to look at the actual files, you'll notice that for pretty much everything, I have basically the command prompt program that I'm running right there, then the argument. You'll notice that there's a colon right here. There's also a colon in the argument. And even for links, HTTPS ones, you'll notice that there's a colon right there too. So there is a specific pattern happening right now. I want all spaces escaped, like this one, except for the very space that's before the last colon in that particular line. This is the last colon on line 41. So therefore, the space right before that, don't escape that one. And that pattern holds true throughout the whole thing, except for the failing line right here. There's no colon in this line. However, I started thinking about it and I'm like, you know what? We're actually missing HTTPS, which is inconsistent with the rest of the formatting. Rather than trying to fix the replace statements, it makes sense to just come into my file. So if we go to that YouTube line, so we go to YouTube and it just does youtube.com. Let's be consistent with our formatting. Do https://www.youtube.com. Now we have the colon that we were missing. And of course, if I make a change there, I also need to do it in the file I'm comparing. Otherwise, that will become its own problem. So on that YouTube line, I want to go https://www.youtube right there. So now we should have still parallel files. So now let's run our unit test again. Oh, looks like that fixed the problem. Now we have a new problem on index 35. So I'm like, oh, look at that. Parentheses also need to get escaped, but according to this, they're not. I think we need to escape parentheses as well. So then I go to my script with the replace statements, and obviously this statement would end up escaping all the parentheses. So I'm replacing a parenthesis with an escape parenthesis. That should fix that problem. So you can see I'm bouncing back and forth and trying to dial in on all my replace statements until all the unit tests pass. So now I run this. All the tests have passed at this point. So I now have valid replace statements. Now I can add that function into my skill and basically apply that. Now I can have a newly formatted file where everything looks nice, right? So I just have single backslashes here, and same with pretty much everywhere else. Single backslashes, and I can have spaces without having to worry about escaping them. It works nice. So yeah, it's kind of a pain to get there, but creating that unit test program made it very simple to dial in on all my replace statements to get both formats exactly the same. So they're getting read exactly the same now because of all those replace statements. So one of the reasons I started doing this as soon as I did is because I'm planning on creating a new skill that allows me to update my commands from the computer, basically from the couch. So let's say that I change my mind on one of my links, or I want to add or delete a link that I would go to. Well, I'm going to add the ability to do that from the couch. Why bother going to the computer, adding an entry to the file, and then it's updated? Why not just do it directly from the couch, especially if I can read the clipboard contents? So that's going to be a skill that I make in the future. But if I update something, I'm not going to want to have to do the quadruple backslashes. I should be able to just do it in the exact format that happens right in Windows. Like that, rather than, you know, this everywhere. So that's one of the reasons I made that change, so that I can create that new skill a lot easier. That's what basically made the push to that change. And then also, I improved my typing mechanism, as I just mentioned before too. Well, I want to be able to grab the contents from the clipboard, but I can't really do that with command prompt. It has to be done in PowerShell. And I figured as long as I'm grabbing clipboard contents in PowerShell, what's the way to add things to the clipboard? Maybe that'll work better and it won't do that stupid new line character thing that it was doing before. And it does improve it, so I improved that while I was doing this too, and that's why. So a major change that I've also made to it is the way I basically identify commands. So let's go to the Philips Hue one real quick. Probably want to actually navigate my directory in there because I'm going to be doing all sorts of stuff. So I don't know why that just popped up there. Normally I just edit anyway because that happens even when I reboot the system, and I don't do that. It still happens. So what you'll notice with that Philips Hue, one thing that makes my commands so dynamic is the fact that I have these if statements right here. I look for certain keywords in my utterances or my trigger, my command phrases. So if the word double is basically anywhere in the utterance, then this happens. But I've done a whole bunch of different approaches in the past. As a matter of fact, if we look at one of my other skills, like the volume one, I will kind of overview how these skills are structured in a bit. But for now, I just want to show, here's another approach that I did where I find something and then I check if it's not -1, meaning I'm getting some sort of result. So if I'm getting some result somewhere, if the word increase is inside of my statement, I don't really like the way I formatted it. I'd probably change it to something like if increase in result dot lower, and then that's basically the end of the statement. That's probably what I do instead. I think that's a more elegant way to do it. I even had a third way of doing things at 1.2. I can't quite remember what I did, but I like to do that if whatever in whatever. I think that's just a much better way to do it. And then I can make my commands very dynamic in nature. Something else that I also started doing is creating pseudo utterances. So like obviously if I give a voice command, then I'm giving a real utterance. But what if I want to issue a fake utterance behind the scenes? Or what if I want to do something in one skill that triggers another skill? Well, it doesn't really make sense to duplicate that other skill into this one, just so I can do the ability here as well. It makes a little bit more sense to have this skill trigger this other one. That would be a much better practice, because then I can have this skill handle the logic here. This skill can basically redirect to this one, rather than also handling what this thing's capable of. I don't want duplication. That's not very efficient. So you can imagine this is most useful for my skill repeater. The ability to repeat the last command. How do I repeat the command? Well, I do a pseudo utterance based on the command I last issued. So we look at my skill repeater skill, for example. The way I do a pseudo utterance is essentially this line right here. This is how you do a pseudo utterance. First of all, you have to import, basically you have to import message bus client as well as message. So in the initialize, I create the global variable client. I set it to message bus client, and then I basically tell it to run. And then as far as like message goes, then I can emit a message. So basically the messenger bus is kind of what's responsible for just about all tasks that are happening. Whether you're receiving a message, which is primarily used for my breadboard LEDs, or you're sending messages. You can also send messages too, rather than just receive them. what if I want to send a fake utterance? Well, this is basically the message that I'm sending. And within that fake utterance, I specify utterance in this really weird syntax. If you want this syntax for yourself to do this, just let me know. I'll paste it in a comment, and you can copy and paste it. It will be on GitHub someday, but until then, that's how I'd recommend obtaining the code from me. So yeah, I emit a fake utterance, and you can put a string right there basically, but that has to be within these brackets because otherwise it might only recognize a single character. That's just how everything is structured. And then the language may be different for you, so you will want to adjust that accordingly, but that's how you emit a fake utterance. And that could be useful in quite a few different situations, like my skill repeater, or remember when I issue a command and then have the computer go to sleep right after? Well, I had it issue the command and then it just ran like go to sleep skill. So it triggered a separate skill, and I did that using this pseudo utterance method right there. So now you're probably also wondering, how do I have a quantifier for how many commands or how many times to run a command? Like if I want to fast forward 5 times, how do I do that? Well, let's go into my open scripts. So basically I have a file that defines all these different quantifiers. So I have this quantifiers.txt file. So I want to be able to say like 2 times or 3 times or 4 times or twice, maybe thrice. So I essentially have a file that does this, and then I use a dictionary lookup to translate human English into numbers that the program can understand. So this essentially loads that file and converts each line into a dictionary item, and then this is what basically determines how many times something happens. So initially I want to check if I have a quantifier like 3 times or 4 times or whatever. So what this does is it looks through each and every entry, and then yeah, this is where there's certain rules for. I essentially remove that quantifier in my utterance because that will mess up the command execution. But it also takes what the quantifier was and then applies the correct behavior. So no data is technically lost even though I remove stuff from my utterance. So what it returns is basically the actual number of times to do something, whether it's like 2, 3, 4. And then it also returns basically the modified utterance with all the quantifiers removed from it. So this is essentially returning a tuple. That's why I can return multiple items. I'm actually just returning one item. It's basically a list. So when I call the function, I have to declare the variables. So this is technically returning one item. A tuple is in parentheses like that. That's what it's really returning. But you don't need parentheses around it, so it looks like you're returning multiple things. Now if we come back to the has quantifier, where I actually use it. See, this is how I store all the results. I'm storing it in this tuple. And yeah, so it gives me how many times to run it. That's an input, but the output, that gives me how many times I'm supposed to run that command. And then this is a modified utterance with all the quantifiers removed from it. Actually, no, that's what this is. I just dump it back into my results. And then I have a loop that runs that quantifier, and it runs it just like it runs any other command, but it does it X amount of times, which is why it's in that loop. And then it Otherwise, I didn't change the main logic for how it actually runs. All I did was add a loop to it for the quantifier. And if I'm not using a quantifier, then this loop just runs one time. Rather than adding like an if statement, like if it's 1, just do it once. If it's anything other than 1, do it that many times. It doesn't make sense to do that. Just loop once, because you can loop only one time. That makes it pretty dynamic. That's why if you look at that function again, you'll notice that it down here returns 1. And the utterance that I gave it, it just spits it back out as it was, because there is no quantifiers to remove. If there's a quantifier anywhere, this will happen. If there's no quantifiers to be found anywhere, this is what happens. This tells it to just run once by default. If I change it to like 9, it'll do everything 9 times by default. So I think it's useful to have the logic right here rather than somewhere down below, like right there. So yeah, and then the beauty of it is because of how I have my AND mechanism set up, this for loop has to do with the AND mechanism, which means I can use a quantifier on multiple commands at once. So I could be like fast forward 5 times and close previous tab 3 times. So I can use a quantifier on multiple commands because I just put it within my AND mechanism and it doesn't change all that much, surprisingly. That ended up being a lot more elegant than what I was originally shooting for. Pretty rare for that to happen, so I want to be savoring that moment. So yeah, that's basically how that works. So let's real quickly go over my actual skills. So how does the backup voice assistant work? So the intent is basically structured like this. I want to back up either the voice assistant, just the phrases alone. So obviously for my open script, I reference that one file with all the backslashes, which I showed previously when I was talking about the slash mechanism change. I may want to just back that up alone rather than everything. So I can say backup phrases if I want to. I could also say backup Mycroft. That'll also work. And of course it technically recognizes it like this, so that's why I have it structured like that. So that covers all the commands themselves. Yeah, here's where I have the if statement not really structured the way I want it to be, because it has that not equal -1. I would rather do like if voice assistant in result dot lower. I think that would be a much better way to do it. I'll change that someday. But yeah, either way, if it finds voice assistant anywhere in my utterance, then it runs that script, which just runs a bunch of SCP commands for the relevant files that I want to back up. If I say phrases, this is another script with a different set of files. And then originally I tried to automate the process of deleting the old files, but it doesn't work very well. So I just do it manually at this point. I could take this out because I'm not going to mess with it anymore. But that's basically how my backup script works. Yeah, this is when I'm in X mode, that's harder to quit than Vim is to quit. But I still did it anyway. So the command modifier, I started creating the skill, but it doesn't technically have any ability yet. The create Mac and Windows skill are pretty much the same. I may end up stripping out all these skills right here because I don't use any of them other than maybe joke every once in a while. But I don't use any auditory feedback with that. So how about the open script? So as you can imagine, that's now structured quite a bit differently. So let's look at the locale file first. So yeah, this is pretty much exactly how it was last time. I probably added a few more words. This is so I can say like open whatever. eliminate sometimes sounds like Illuminati, and so on. So I added a bunch of words that it'll accept, and then it minimizes the false negatives that I end up getting where it doesn't work when I want it to. So that's what the locale file looks like. The script now looks like this. So I fixed that AND mechanism by adding spaces everywhere. This function is basically kind of like the locale file, except I have multiple words here. For like lay down, sometimes it also recognizes it as light out, which ironically sounds the same. It almost has the same meaning, doesn't it? But that's how it recognizes lay down sometimes. Of course, that's an in-joke, lay down. But yeah, this is where I define any words that I use with that. So if there's other words that I recognize as wrong, that gets added there. In the future, I might do it from a file rather than hard coding it here, but for now, that works really well. It worked well for my demonstration. Usually if anything goes wrong, it tends to happen during my demonstrations. That's how it always goes. So yeah, the quantifiers, where I do like repeat this X amount of times, or I just have it run something X amount of times. I define like twice or 5 times in a file, which translates to the actual integer that it means behind the scenes. So this loads that file in the format that it should be, which is a dictionary. This I already went over. It checks basically how many times. It was originally gonna just check whether it has a quantifier or not, but then I realized I could just use it to return how many times I'm repeating something, and then getting rid of the quantifiers in the utterance, so I have a clean utterance without quantifiers in it. So it returns those two things. That's my backslash replace mechanism. I kind of showed the process of making that. So those are functions that I have beforehand. Those functions are so useful though, because I'm adding stuff basically in a test script, and then I can just dump that all in, which is pretty nice. So I load all my files, and then the backslash mechanism just gets replaced right there, right before we mess with it. So then of course this is where I get the quantifiers if there are any, and then I loop either once or however many times I want to repeat something. Fuzzy search works the same, and then the command execution works the same too. The only difference is I added the AND mechanism for sleep, which is just kind of a botch that I added. This is how I do that. So basically, if there isn't any sleep related commands, run it like it always does. Otherwise, it emits a pseudo utterance for lay down. Doesn't matter how it recognizes it, even if I say go to sleep, it'll do lay down for the pseudo utterance, because why would I do anything else? It'll do something that's guaranteed to work 100% of the time, 100% of the time. So yeah, that's how my OpenScript is structured now. It's pretty much the same as before. Now let's take a look at the Philips Hue one. I'll start with the locale, because I can't really do any commands unless the locale is set properly. Turn on or off the lights, double brightness, half brightness. I'm going to make this a little bit more dynamic in the future, but for now, this is how I can set the brightness. I'm also going to change this so none of these commands cause crosstalk with the other irrelevant Mycroft skills where it currently causes problems. That's accomplished by ensuring all programmed utterances don't interfere with each other anymore. Having nothing right here means I can also say set brightness, where it ignores the. So set brightness is also perfectly acceptable. And then if I say like 50%, this kind of acts as somewhat of a black void. Anything I say after this is still an acceptable command. If I don't add this right here, then it's not gonna work. I can't do my dynamic commands. I don't reference this variable anywhere, but like I said, it just kind of acts as a filler. So I can put anything there and it still counts as a valid command. I could put stuff completely unrelated to percentages, it'll still work. And then I do the same thing with color temperature or color. Kind of put that all in one statement. So honestly, I could consolidate these into one by putting brightness and color. Obviously, I could do color, then brightness could go right there. That would allow me to put it all in one, and then I can get rid of this. That would be perfectly acceptable. I'm not going to make that change because I don't want to restart the voice assistant to apply it. But the actual skill itself looks like this. I always ignore this. So yeah, I also have the AND mechanism in this skill too, which works exactly the same. The logic is exactly the same as before. This is the same logic for loading quantifiers and stuff. But this is semicolon separated rather than comma separated. This is basically, I have separate files for defining stuff like the color temperatures that are possible, like warm or cold or normal. Those are my human terms that I define in that file. This loads all those. And then the color temperature basically gets translated. It finds whether it exists. Then it basically does a bit of parsing and ultimately results in the format that's needed later on. This loads all the percentages, which is comma separated. That's why there's a separate function for that. This is what actually sets the color. So if I say like red, for example, this will return red all by itself. So it looks for red. It basically scans through all my defined words, looks for it, and if it's there, that's what it returns. It gets that all by itself, but then it's easier to use it down the line. And then translate percent more or less does the same thing with the actual percent. And since I don't want a percent symbol, I basically use regex to isolate the number all by itself and get rid of that. This actually converts the brightness into the spectrum that's used with the, I forgot to mention, I used the Hue library right there. That's how I basically made it work. Watch the video where I set it up. I actually only worked on it on camera pretty much, so you can see my whole process of making this skill by watching the 2 videos I've made on that so far. But yeah, so this translates a percent into the spectrum that the Hue library uses. And technically, I don't need to return brightness num. I could technically return this right there, get rid of that. But again, I don't want to restart the voice assistant right now, so I'm not going to save those changes. So it initializes the bridge, which I had to pair. It's a Philips Hue bridge. The IP address is always going to be the same, so that's great. Otherwise, I maybe put it in a file if it changes frequently. So this will get my utterance, as I tend to do in a lot of my skills. I don't know if I'm even using that query words at all. Yeah, all this code right here is technically no longer relevant. I'm not going to save those changes either, but yeah, then I parse all my intents with the AND mechanism just like I used to do. So then I basically go through everything in my AND mechanism. So it looks for the keyword double. This is what doubles the brightness, gets the current brightness, multiplies it by 2. Half brightness divides it by 2, as you can imagine. Turning it off just goes through all the lights and turns them off. Turning them on does that. If I say anything related to brightness, Then it runs that convert brightness function, which is right there. If I say anything with the color temperature, I could honestly just look for the word temp and temperature. That would make it even more dynamic with how I can execute commands. So yeah, I have this function that basically parses out how to do everything, gives it in the format that it should be, as you would expect. Same with the color. So as far as figuring out the colors goes, it was kind of hard to figure out how to map it out. So there's a function that comes with the library where you can, there's a couple ways to identify colors, such as the RGB value. Philips Hue doesn't actually use RGB. It uses hue, saturation, brightness. That's one way to identify colors. It uses XY, or it uses a color temperature. But I tried doing the RGB to XY. It doesn't translate everything 100% accurately. If you watch the video, you'll know that it doesn't work 100%. So I use a hue value which goes between 0 and 65,535. And I basically just mapped out all the colors manually. The saturation for all my colors is always going to be the highest, which goes up to 254. So the way I ended up mapping out the colors, which I never actually showed in any of the videos yet, I did this kind of last minute, was so on my Stream Deck I have all the colors mapped, so I could just do like red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and it does things as I want, you can imagine, right? So what I ended up doing was, since I have presets that I like on my Philips Hue, my Stream Deck, I go to red, then I'll load my screen. I went into my Philips Hue app right here. It recognizes that all the colors are red. I go to one of my bulbs, go to the Hue tab, and I can see that the hue is set to 0. And if I go along the spectrum, I can see that it goes between 0 and 100. So, like I said, the Python library goes between 0 and 65,535. So I basically need to map out the proportions. I just take 65,535 divided or multiplied by whatever this hue is here, and then divide that by 100. I believe that converts it into the format I want. So this is 0. And since I had a bunch of colors to map, I ended up creating a spreadsheet. So let me turn that off for now. And of course the keying is not working perfectly, so I'm gonna temporarily turn this back. So I ended up making a spreadsheet that basically just plugs in the formula for all the different numbers. So when I run red, I get 0 according to the app right here, right? So then I punch that into the formula I just mentioned. That gives me 0 along the wider spectrum that the actual program uses. So then I did my orange preset. Then I come back to the app right here. Go to a light that changed to orange. I can see that that's mapped as 18. So then I just punch in 18. That's apparently what the number is. I rounded that down. And this number I rounded up. And then I have a file that basically maps all that out. So if I go to color words, this is basically each color and then the corresponding value. I either rounded it up or down. So that's kind of how I figured out my colors and got it to exactly what I want it to be. So yeah, that's how I mapped out all my colors, and I can add more colors in the future if I want. But I did it based on the hue value and got it to match up accordingly. So yeah, that's more or less how that ability works. So now let's take a look at my search skill. I don't think I made any changes to it. Oh yeah, this is actually the file where I wanted to change my mechanism for, because as you can see right here, I break down everything into each individual word, split it by a space basically, and then I look at the first word, see if that's YouTube or whatever it is. What if it's like the second or third word? Why should that make it any less valid? Right? So I would change this mechanism to the if YouTube in result.lower, then it doesn't matter where it is in the utterance, it's still a YouTube result. I may even want to put my search term before I say YouTube. Search blah 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 on YouTube. Right? So if I structure it this way, then I'd be able to have a lot more flexibility in how I execute the command. But yeah, otherwise the logic right now is basically the same as it was before. So yeah, I don't know if I mentioned this yet, but I think I'm probably going to end up doing a free course on YouTube that goes over how to do all this. So this looks like a janky mess right now. I'm going to try to have a structured course in the future that's hopefully easy to follow. It'll mainly involve installing all the abilities that I've created one by one and adapting it to your own environment, and maybe how to make certain changes you might want to make. But then we'll also make them from scratch, which will kind of teach the process and basically anything you need to know to create your own abilities and commands. We'll try to go over best practices as I'm learning them over time, because I can't really find any guides anywhere. I'm pretty much figuring all this out through trial and error. So if you want to figure this out in the meantime, that's what I suggest you do as well, until I end up doing a course like I just mentioned. But yeah, so obviously that course will work with Windows, Mac, and Linux. I'll probably have separate modules for each one depending on what you're using. And that will be free on YouTube. I'm not going to charge anything for that. I want more people to use this. That's the main thing. Because it is so powerful. It is privacy focused. You can literally make commands exactly how you want. And you can learn a fair bit of programming from this too. That's why I would go making all these commands from scratch. And then going over best practices too. There aren't really any clear guides on how to do any of this, so that's kind of why I want to do that. So look forward to that in the future, hopefully. Can't make any promises with that, but that should be coming out in the future. So here's what the skill repeater looks like. The utterances are pretty self-explanatory. Repeat that last command, repeat that, stuff like that. I pretty much showed all the fancy syntax that locale files would have. You can probably add support for multiple languages if you want to. I'm sure that's possible. That's something I don't know right now, but I'm sure it's something I may end up addressing in the course. Who knows? So I have quantifiers for this as well, because I want to be able to repeat something X amount of times. That logic is pretty much the same as what I showed before. Load all the quantifiers, get our utterance, whatever that is, and then basically just do what it always does by default, but X amount of times, one or something that's more than one. And yeah, it does that pseudo utterance syntax, and it actually reads from the utterances file. The -3 is basically the thing that it should be repeating, because there's going to be a new line character at the end, so -1 is blank. -2 is that repeat command that I just executed, so that's not it. The one before that is the one I want to repeat. So that's why it's -3, which may seem counterintuitive. That's why it's that though. So now how about the typing skill, because that's quite a bit different. So yeah, I have a bunch of replace statements for That's how I did like a question mark before. The replace statements file is pretty much exactly what you'd expect it to be. So like for example, a period gets reinterpreted as that. A comma gets interpreted as a comma. Question mark is that. I may want to do question all by itself, right? I can do that if I want to have more flexibility with that. Obviously, this normally gets lowercase by default, but I want it to uppercase, so I added a statement for that. If I want it to be any different than what it is by default, this is where I do that. So like, it tends to not recognize this word, for example, so it replaces this with that. And yeah, I'm gonna be adding a lot more in the future, but I don't use it enough, which is why I don't have very many at the moment. So yeah, this is basically what applies those replace statements. And then most of the stuff works exactly how you'd expect. I have multiple of these commented out, mainly because I did a bunch of different approaches with quotations and stuff. This is the one that I'm actually using. Whoops. Yeah, so it runs PowerShell. This is how you execute stuff from PowerShell, by the way. So I use set clipboard. The value is basically my utterance, and I'm escaping those double quotes. The quotation is really confusing, but this is what I ended up doing that works. And then right after that, in PowerShell, it ends up running my Control-V AutoHotkey script, which will ultimately paste the text. So these other lines, I just kind of wanted to show some of the other approaches that I've tried that never ended up working, but they're not important. So that's kind of how my typing ability works now. I'm going to add the same thing to search in the future, because I may want to have special search syntax, but a lot of times, even without special syntax, I still get relevant results. But for example, when I say Mycroft for searching, it ends up doing Minecraft instead. And that's not proper searching at all. So I don't want it to, I may end up adding replace statements for that, for example. Again, the replace statements are meant to correct any behavior that's wrong by default. And that's a good way to do it. So the volume adjusts. Looks like I'm using that old find mechanism. I do like how everything lines up nicely, so it's really easy to see what's going on. So yeah, basically what it does for the volume adjust is it uses NIR-CMD. I did actually do a live stream on that too. That was the live stream where my Intel NUC overheated, and that's why I kept freezing up the way it did. I got those heating issues resolved. I should have an excerpt about that too, where I just talked about the recent heating issues that I had. So yeah, NIR-CMD allows me to change the volume with a relative value, positive to go up, negative to go down, and it's between 0 and 65,535 as well, just like the Philips Hue is. And then the way I put the computer to sleep also uses NIR-CMD, which is why I have it in the volume skill. I just haven't bothered creating a separate skill for that. Why bother, given that the logic is literally the same? I will probably do it in the future if I end up sharing any of this on GitHub. I have to do a major revamp on GitHub, which is why I haven't done that yet. And then if I want to just turn off the monitor rather than putting the computer to sleep, that is possible to do on the command line, amazingly. So yeah, I've tried to do that in the past using raw command prompt. It's not possible, so using this third-party utility, you can do that. So NIR-CMD is something you can download online. I put it in the System32 folder, so it's easy to reference here. Otherwise, it'd be a lot more complicated to reference some path in a special syntax. So yeah, that's how my volume adjust works. I believe the what happened is structured exactly the same as it was before too. Yeah, I never changed anything yet, but I'm probably going to change stuff in the future. I guess I'll talk about that if it ends up happening. So now let's talk about the breadboard script, because that's probably quite a bit different too from what you've seen last time. So the launch script is exactly the same. It goes into the environment that Mycroft uses, and then it does a no hang up signal just like it did before. So the actual breadboard script looks like this. So it starts everything as you'd imagine. That's all the same. I'll just go over the main differences. So this is how I had the yellow light flash X amount of times depending on the situation. So I have a flash function. I can give it whatever color I want to flash, red, green, or yellow. Then how many times do I want to do it? I just created a function and the logic is exactly the same. So this everything function, that just puts every message there, because I'm going to add some functionality in the future. I want to see what messages look like, and then that way I know how to apply that. So I can just see what all the messages are that even exist. That's how I set the LEDs to what I did. I looked at all the messages, found what was relevant for my LED. So this is a function I created that this is how I detected the Ethernet cables unplugged. So if you want to look at the output of the os.system, you do os.popen, whatever the command is, .read. It still runs the command like os.system, it just returns the actual standard out. I think before it returned standard error, if I'm not mistaken, with os.system. But yeah, if this term is anywhere in that command, that means the red light should come on. That's what makes it come on. I was also trying like a timeout with a ping command. That's not really the best way to detect if an SSH command is failing, but it's something I was trying. I'm going to want to add more proper error detection, like if I'm actually trying to run SSH and a very specific command doesn't work, while a different command may work perfectly fine. I want the red LED to come on for that thing that did not work. I would add all that logic in here, and it returns true if it needs to turn on at all for any reason whatsoever in perpetuity throughout the universe. So of course, when I issue my command, turn green, otherwise turn off the green light. And then if there's an error, then the red light comes on once I'm done speaking. I should probably do it before and have it not listen at all if there's an error, but this is how I have it structured for now. One thing I will also mention is with my current logic of the yellow LED, when I restart it and all the lights turn on, the yellow turns itself off after like 20 or 30 seconds, while the red and green are still on. I don't know why that is. That's a bug I'm not going to worry about for right now. So of course this triggers when the remote configuration update happens, meaning it's fully started up and it's ready to be used. So as I mentioned before in the last update, I restarted twice because sometimes it does this uncommitted changes error, even if I have everything up to date. I don't know why it happened, but restarting everything again does fix that. So yeah, that's my mechanism for logging an utterance. I was making it so that it doesn't log the repeats command, but because I'm omitting a pseudo utterance with the repeater, the last command will still end up being the thing I repeated rather than the repeat command itself, because it is another real utterance that went through. A pseudo utterance is technically a real utterance. So because of that, the yellow LED actually ends up coming on even if I run a command from here, like turn off my lights. The yellow LED actually will come on when I hit enter, like instantly. If you need some proof, I'm about to hit enter right here. So when I hit enter, then the yellow LED is gonna turn itself on instantly. Ready? So that's the beauty of using the messenger service. It actually turns on like right away. I didn't actually anticipate being able to do that, but that is kind of a cool side effect. So yeah, this is what makes it. So if I back up the voice assistant, it'll flash 3 times. If I open my cloud backup, it'll flash 4 times. If I close the cloud backup, which I like to do when I'm not using it, it'll flash 5 times since I don't get any direct feedback. If there's other things where I don't get direct feedback, I might have some sort of blink code. Probably do some Morse code. That's always an option too. So the possibilities really are endless when it comes to this. You could literally program it exactly how you want. If you don't like the way I do stuff, well, set it up the way you like it. It's amazing. So yeah, basically I have the yellow light come on when this particular thing gets triggered right here. That makes the yellow light come on. And then these 2 things technically make it turn off, whichever one comes first. So when I say that the yellow LED turns off while it's starting up and the red and green stay on, this is why. Because for some reason this message gets sent even when it's first starting up. I can't really do anything about that. I think I'm just going to deal with it for now. This is how you detect when a skill is finished executing. The problem is that message does not trigger for every command that I do. So like if I open YouTube, for example, there's some other code that happens and it doesn't properly send this message indicating that the skill execution is complete. So I don't do things that way. I can tell when it's safe for me to execute my next command because of this triggering though. So that's why I have it set up that way. And yeah, that's it. So that is actually basically it for my voice assistant. So that's how it's set up. So hope you enjoyed the status update. I have some pretty exciting stuff coming out in the future as well, like the ability to modify commands from the couch. I'm gonna hopefully have the computer trigger phrase next time too. I just had to do some machine learning training and that can be a little technically demanding, but I'm probably gonna do that relatively soon so I can be like, computer, end simulation or whatever. This video is almost done, so yeah. I'm also going to completely end up revamping my breadboard script because right now the AND mechanism only works with my open skill. Like I can't use it across multiple skills. I have to be using commands from the same skill for it to work. It works with the Philips Hue because I manually programmed it for that, but I can't like turn off my lights and eliminate program. Those are 2 completely different skills right now. So in the future, I'm probably going to revamp my breadboard script, which for those of you who don't use a breadboard, you might actually find some benefit having what I would call a master script, which kind of facilitates the whole thing and interacts with the messenger service. And if you want to do something that's not skill specific, such as logging your utterance to a file, then using a master script is a pretty useful way to do that. But anyway, I want to revamp my master script so that I can use the AND command across multiple skills. So like maybe I want to search YouTube blah 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 and maximize window. Those are 2 separate skills right there. And what I would do is I'd add that AND mechanism from my open script to the master script. Then it'll work across multiple skills because I can emit a pseudo utterance, which I showed earlier. I can break down one command into multiple commands and then emit pseudo utterances rather than just the raw utterances, and then yeah, there I go. That should allow me to do it from any skill whatsoever. I'm also going to add the ability to, with that repeater script, I want to be able to repeat the nth command. So like, maybe I issued a command 10 commands ago that I want to repeat again. It's not the most recent thing, it's like the 10th most recent thing. So in that case, I would probably end up using basically like a repeat the 10th command rather than the first. Then that would be the 10th command from the bottom, 10th most recent command. So I might add the ability to do that. I would also like to add proper support for multiple computers, because typically it's optimized for just one computer at a time. I would like to add support to do certain things on whatever computer, then I can specify do this thing on this computer and then do that thing on that computer all in one command. That would be really cool. And then of course I'm going to do like hands-free searching, so I can select search results completely hands-free. I'd like to add the ability to move the mouse as well. I would also like to add the ability to detect errors or improve it, as I mentioned earlier. I'd like to also fix that yellow light so that it turns on when a command is actually done being executed, even in those situations where I can't reliably make it happen. Of course, I'd also like to be able to start it headlessly, even on the Raspberry Pi. Yeah, we got some pretty interesting updates coming up. I don't even know how to do follow-up conversation yet, where I issue a command and then it asks a follow-up question. I don't know how to do that yet, but hopefully I'm going to have that working by the next update too. But yeah, in the meantime, that's all there is for Mycroft updates.